session, which will be covering all aspects related to cyber risks. Our first topic will be covered by Mr. Carsten Topsch from Munich and Mr. Mohammed manager of Fenchurch Faris, will head this session. As for the second topic, Mr. Faris Gammoh, CEO of JIIG, will introduce the last speaker for this day, Mr. Fabian Willi from Swiss Reinsurance Company, who will discuss cyber exposures under traditional lines of business.
Carsten Topsch is a senior underwriter, Casualty at Munich Re. He is a trained lawyer and holds a master's degree in insurance law. He joined Munich Re in 2010 as a corporate underwriter Casualty. From 2015 until now, serves as a senior underwriter Casualty, Facultative for the markets, Germany, Asia, Pacific, and Africa, with a focus on industrial liability, and operates as a cyber expert for these markets. He is a member of the Munich Re Expert Network for Cyber Risks. I introduce Mr. Carsten.
Thank you. You hear me? Thank you very much. Actually, I have to correct something. I'm not doing casualty business anymore. I'm now heading up a team purely responsible for cyber insurance. Our team writes treaty and facultative cyber insurance for all in all our markets. You can hear me over there? Now you can hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much for the honor that I can talk about one of the hottest topics in the market, cyber insurance. I just want to give you a brief introduction to this topic. Well, I would like to share with you some backgrounds of cyber insurance. What are the motivation behind there? Then the position of Munich Re in this respect. Cyber, going into detail, we have a holistic underwriting approach which we share with our clients, and I will explain something about this. Claims management, you know, there are two critical points when it comes to cyber insurance. One is sales and the other one is claims management. So we are talking about this. And then to round it up, Munich Re services. The motivation, you know, when I bought my first mobile phone, it was like 1998. I didn't expect that this mobile phone could write emails or I can see a movie on this phone. I didn't know about email anyways. I didn't know about streaming. And now, while we are all doing this, you're taking pictures, you're streaming, you can use your mobile for telephoning in the end. So nobody does anymore, but anyways. So what I just want to get your attention on is things change dramatically. So when we talk about the printing press, like in 1400, this has an effect on the social behavior of people. So they started reading, so they started with the printing and like mass products, telescopes, etc. But in the last year, just see the examples. So we have the cell phones, the hybrid cars, YouTube came on the surface, Facebook, iPads, and so on. They all changed our social behavior and what we're doing all the time, and it's rapidly developing. And so is it with the cyber exposure. So if we have a product for cyber insurance right now, well, we won't have the time to develop it like we had for the liability insurance. It took us 50 years. We should develop it now. But risk will change, so you always need to adjust the pricing, the risk assessment, and the wording to consider the new things which are coming up, like blockchain technology, smart home, and so on. So this is just I would like you to keep in mind. What do we do in Munich Re? We do all, actually. So we do private line business, we do SME business, the medium-sized enterprises, industrial risks, and the really large-scale industry, the big Fortune 500. But here I would like to concentrate on the SME business, because we see a lot of potential in this segment. When it comes to this cyber business as such, the originally insured, we need to think about who is it? How could this target be interesting for a hacker? So what are the assets? Is it a bakery? Is it like an energy providing company? So are there special intellectual property which has to be protected? So this has to be all like identified in the asset management, in the risk assessment. Then what protection is there? So is there an access control? Is there internal trainings, awareness trainings within the company? Are there special people handling the IT matters when it comes to a crisis? Who would deal with this? So how does the protection look like, the backups and things like that? Then anomalies and events, how long would it take the company to detect if there has anything happened already? Is there like a security monitoring? What do they do? As I said, who takes care about it? This has to be, so as we know, like we saw recent cases, viruses can be in the system since years, but you need to have the chance to detect that there is something in to identify the measures which should apply. Identifying the measures, so is there a response planning and mitigation planning for the risks? Recovery planning, are there improvements to the systems which the company, the original insured, uses, like we saw now in the WannaCry case, but we will talk about this later on, I think. So this was like one thing, that the system weren't up for improvements already, so there were a little like vulnerability which has been identified by the hackers. So this is their planning to prevent from such things. And then there's a risk gap. So you can't always be sure that you're the one who are best protected. There would be always one hacker. If he targets you, you will be hacked. So there's no 100% protection against cyber hacking. But if there's a risk gap, there's cyber insurance. And this is where you come into place. This is your chance to provide your clients a tailor-made cyber insurance for your insurance. There's just one little gap which Munich Re does not cover. This is the outage of external networks. This is one of our accumulation models. I will talk about this a bit later on. Just to show you the dimensions of cyber risk. So there are always like 4 dimensions. the security, the more like technical dimension, the liabilities which could arise out of misbehavior of the insured. There are compliance and privacy rules which have to be obeyed, and of course there's reputation. So if I would ask you here in the audience, who of you have been attacked? Please raise your hands. Okay, we've got 2. And now, who of you have been attacked and doesn't know about it? Please raise your hand.
Who doesn't know that?
Yeah. So the numbers behind there, they're really something which we should consider. So because nobody actually wants to notify that they have been attacked, but there are now privacy rules, and they just there's no rule to notify, and there are some laws on the run. Like in the European Union, there will be a new directive which regulates notifications and IT security standards. We have like an IT security law which addresses critical infrastructure, privacy laws of course, and some legal settings which already give like a way how those cases would be decided. Then on the security side, so what could be there? So what are the the scenarios we're talking of? It's of course like the DDoS, denial of service attacks. It's cyber extortion, ransomware. Actually, there's an acceleration of like 120% compared to the last year in ransomware, theft of data, computer viruses, and so forth. And on the reputational side, loss of reputation after a cyber incident. So you really have to swiftly respond on an attack to minimize the claim in the end. This is what we actually experience in the United States. So instant crisis management is the clue, especially for the reputational risk. So we saw in the past some cases where like national banks or power stations have been hacked, and which actually has been detected like years ago. But in the end, when it became publicly notified, the CEO had to step back. So it's an D&O issue also. When it comes to liability, of course, the violation of intellectual property, then there is like a small line to differ between cyber insurance and product and service failure. This would be a more prevailing topic in the future, we think, and privacy violation, of course, like we see it in cyber mobbing cases. This all addresses more like the first party side and the third party side, and in the combination with the costs. And this is actually exactly cyber product we have in mind. Talking about cyber, the insurance market, our board of management is very keen on promoting cyber. We have a dedicated loss control engineering department in our company, and we have like in corporate underwriting a risk mitigation unit. So we are keen to write cyber, and our prognosis is that cyber will reach in the next year $6 billion, whereas like 30% will coming out of the non-US states. This is new, and this tendency will be the same in the future. So in 2020 we will exceed in the end $8 billion, with nearly half of it will come from the non-US markets. What we think drives cyber insurance in all lines in all segments, private lines, industrial lines, and SME lines, is of course the trend of digitalization, the Internet of Things trends, the interconnectedness of devices. Then there's of course like a rising legislation which has to be obeyed, new cyber products coming onto the markets, and we think that accumulation capacity will be rare in the future because we see there's a large accumulation potential, and we see further trends in respect of this. We currently write like 263 million US dollar in cyber, so our market position is about 10% of the global market, and we strive to keep this market share in the future. We write cyber in reinsurance, in direct insurance, and with our industrial partners CIP. But this is just a side message. But what we want to provide our clients with, like a holistic underwriting tool, which our cedents can pick and choose whatever they want. It should fit to our cedents' like risk appetite, to the portfolio, to their sales infrastructure, and their claims abilities. Wording, what we did is we developed a modular wording, like to pick and choose. This has to be adapted to the legal environment of the specific market and the cedent's needs, as I said already. We provide up to 9 independent coverage sections, and this wording is applicable for small and medium-sized enterprises. What we see when it comes to industrial risk is, of course, like a copy-paste trend that, like market-leading wordings, are anyways used as a basis for industrial wordings. But we think there's like a chance to differ in the market when it comes to the SME business, and that's why we try to convince our clients to go into a product development project phase. Munich Re cyber covers, what you see highlighted in bluish, greenish, is the more first party side coverages, and highlighted in yellow the liability side coverages. And this actually is always a combination between a combination of first party and third party coverage combined with the costs. So what we have is like loss or theft of data coverage, privacy breach protection coverage, then on the other side privacy breach liability coverage, and confidentiality breach liability coverage. PCI DSS is a coverage which not all the clients would like to provide to their origin insurers. Business interruption we see as a standard cover, but as an optional cover. Cyber extortion as well, because regulation differs in the various countries, and ransom money is not always allowed to be paid out. But we are flexible, and we could give advice on this, how this could develop. Where we see cyber insurance, it's like on a standalone cyber coverage, like as an annex or an endorsement, and then of course there silent cyber coverages. Fabian will touch upon this later on a bit. And where there are no exclusions, it's more or less like a silent coverage, the typical silent coverage. And then there are silent cyber gaps in exclusions, so the interpretation of exclusions. And we see cyber exposures in all lines of business, be it property, casualty, marine, agro, health, aviation, and life. Examples of silent cyber risks, just some examples, for instance, airlines, the lot grounding. I don't know, Fabian, if you tell something about the southwestern grounding last year. So there were like Southwestern Airlines in the US, they had a grounding for some hours. It were like, not only some hours, a bit more. And the total loss in the end were $100 million. The Jeep Cherokee, the case in the US, the Ukraine blackout, the first case, we had like a recent one. So these are examples of silent cybers. They are there, not explicitly covered, but in the end should be somebody who pays the claim. Risk assessment, what do we need for the risk assessment? It's the general information of the company, what industry, what activity, what turnover, the year's exposure, and the IT security budget. What we ask for and what we search in the internet is, for instance, the satisfaction of the employees. This gives a hint on how often do the employees like doing privacy stuff in the internet during working hours. So, and if they do a lot, vulnerabilities are bigger, and so there are more hacking attacks. Insurance, information about requested and prior insurance, quality of data. So we usually differ between three main qualities of data. It's the PII, the personal identifiable information, the PCI, payment card information, PHI, privacy health information, and non-PII. So non-PII shouldn't be a big problem then in the end. Services, usually all companies source some processes, some data out. So, and what we're asking for to see, okay, how much depends the original insured on others. And IT security, the organization and technical criteria, as I said, are there internal trainings, is there crisis management, are there like dedicated people looking at the IT side and so on, and is there somebody in the management who's takes care of this. And then of course history, events, claims, losses. What we did in Munich Re is we created a number of different questionnaires. As a model, so we provide this to our clients to start with. The positive effect with our questionnaires is that we can combine it with our pricing model. We developed for our students a original pricing model, like a pricing methodology based on our US losses and the losses we already have in our book. And so it's a watch out, probabilistic and deterministic methodology we used. So we had like a number of actuaries trying to set up a pricing. So what we did recently is to combine like the questionnaire with the pricing, so that in the end, when our students decided on what cover they actually have in mind, they could get a more or less like automated pricing idea in the end. Cyber accumulation. Yeah, I'm talking about reinsurance cyber accumulations. Of course, if you start to write like a specialized book, like only architects or only hospitals or whatever, or only financial institutions, you would have like an accumulation exposure, which has to be modeled somehow. What we did in Munich Re is that we looked at several scenarios, and we been recently like working on, I think, 12 accumulation scenarios. This is like an overview on what we are working right now, where we had like a model in place. So the self-reproducing computer virus. 4 minutes I have. Okay, so I have to speed up a bit. So the self-reproducing computer virus, it's something like, I don't want to cry, is what we feel is a untargeted cyber attack on multiple computer system, and a large number of systems is infected by one event. Cyber coverage is affected, first-party business interruption and data losses. What we have in place is a PML calculation model. So when we have a certain portfolio data, we could calculate a PML, which we now, looking later on WannaCry, very confident that our model works. This is has an effect on our risk capital model. So it's a budgeted. It's a budget we need to apply for and approved by our financial authority. So this is how Munich Re deals with the self-reproducing computer virus. And this PML, in the end, would give like the basis for the annual aggregate limit we provide our clients with. Then there's the targeted cyber attack against critical infrastructures. Is the outage of the internet as such. Just imagine if now the internet wouldn't work here anymore, I wouldn't have a clue about how many mobiles, how many iPads, how many computer systems would be affected only here. If there's like a bigger regional outage or like a global outage, we can't simply model it. So if you have an idea how to model the outage of external networks, please contact us, and of course it's not only a bottle of champagne you would win. So I would really like to encourage you to help us. Then the other models, so what we do is the coverage of the IT service provider, the failure of the IT service provider. What we just want to have is like a bit of transparency in the questionnaire, which IT service providers are used, like Amazon Cloud, Apple Cloud, whatever, so that we can in the end assess, okay, if there's a failure of one of the major IT service providers, what influence would it be on our portfolio? Just shortly to the claims management, I have to be really frank. So if you want to provide a cyber insurance, that means a bit of investment. There's no white label product on the market. the claims management really drives the profitability of the product. So, and this requires some of the assistance services. I wanted to show in this picture. So the IT service provider who actually goes into the systems and does the recovery. It's the crisis management, it's public relations, legal consultancy, especially if you talk maybe about privacy lines products. Legal consultancy is one of the major aspects. Identity protection, recovery, all this, and of course there should be a technical hotline who knows how to deal with cyber incidents. Contact me, we have an idea to combine it later on and maybe have a solution. Munich Re services, product development, I'm running out of time. This is the usual stage. It's that we look at the market and share with you our legal study. It's the common product design, decision on the coverage components, the development of a business plan, and so on. Usually, what from my experience, it takes like a year, and it's not only because like the project teams are slowly. No, it's because usually the internal IT budget just to launch a new product. This is one of the major drivers, but we can consult on this. We could share on our accumulation assumptions and so on. Thank you for your attention and looking forward to your questions very soon.
Thank you, Carsten. What we decided to do is combine the two sessions. So what we're going to have is Fabian will give the next presentation, then we'll open up the conversation. Given the urgency of what's going on in cyber insurance, I think a lot of questions. The next session that we're covering with Mr. Fabian Willi is on cyber coverage under traditional lines. So the lines that we're already writing. Fabian is based in Zurich and is a member of the cyber and digital strategy team at Swiss Re. In his role, he is responsible for the development and implementation of Swiss Re's global cyber reinsurance strategy. Prior to that, Fabian worked several years as a senior casualty underwriter for Swiss Re in New York, Paris, and Zurich, where he specialized in international casualty and financial lines businesses. He holds an MSc in Business Administration from the University of Bern, and we look forward to hearing more from Fabian. Thank you.
Thank you, Faris. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome as well from my side to this cyber session. Do you have to click? Exactly. So I'd like to start my session with this holiday picture, actually, because I believe it gives you very nicely transition from what we heard in Carsten's session to my session. And so far, what we have been talking about was really about the affirmative, explicit cyber exposure, right? The products exactly which are around and address cyber risks, standalone products or extensions to other lines. We heard about it. The market is roughly between 3.5 and 4 billion at this point in time. And so I would say it's a little bit this green island on the top, right? But there is much more to cyber, especially if you look at how the cyber exposure looks like in all the different traditional lines of businesses. So usually we call that silent cyber or non-affirmative cyber, or there is people calling it the dark matter as well. And my goal for this session is actually to give you a bit of flavor of what this is all about and dive in with you together below the surface of the water and get some more ideas on how silent cyber could actually be in the products you do offer nowadays. Now, silent cyber, why does it matter actually, right? And I'd like to start with giving you a claims example. This is from Germany in 2014, where actually a steel mill has been attacked by very sophisticated attackers. What happened there was that they could actually go into the IT system of the steel mill by a phishing attack, and then from there getting access to the industrial control system of the steel mill. They would actually damage this blast furnace, right? So the steel mill could not shut it down anymore, and this resulted in physical damage and property damage, right? And I guess this example nicely explains how a cyber attack, a cyber exposure can also lead to a really physical outcome. And such a scenario would actually generally be covered in many of our property all-risk policies, right? Be it just like the physical damage or the consequential business interruption coming out of that physical damage. So my point here, it's a real risk, right? It's out there. Other examples are, for example, the Stuxnet case you probably have read about, and there is many more. Now, it's also important from another point of view, right? So regulators are slowly going into the space of silent exposure, and because they are concerned actually that people, they would not really know what they write in their books. So the PRA, the UK regulator, just came out with a position paper recently where they recommended that insurance companies, they would have a close look at what is the silent cyber exposure in their books. And we are expecting that there is much more to come, that in a couple of years probably people also have to manage and control that exposure and to make it public. So it's an important topic, which is definitely on the agenda of many players. Now, what is the situation? So if you look at sort of the extent of cyber coverage, right? So we heard it before briefly. So there's the affirmative, explicit products, a cyber product. Obviously, cyber is covered there, right? But there is also all traditional lines where there is no cyber exclusion in the policy wording, and they are potentially exposed to respond to cyber perils. Be it because there is no exclusion at all, or be it because the exclusions which are in the wording are not sufficient, or they do have write-backs, so just parts of the cyber exposure is actually excluded. And last but not least, there is as well products which fully exclude cyber, just to complete a bit the range of products which are out there. Now, if you look at where the silent cyber exposure is coming in, this is mainly in the two middle areas, right? Where we do have products which are just silent, no exclusions, and the ones where the exclusions are not fully exhaustive, right? And this is actually true for most of the products we do know, right? So literally the entire universe of traditional lines of businesses are to some extent exposed I would say a lesser or even more extent, right? It heavily depends, obviously, on how the insuring scope of coverage is drafted. It heavily depends on how definitions look like, but there is enough examples which actually show that there is exposure in these kind of products. And as I said before already, it's important to also have a close look at the exclusions, right, to see if they really exclude every cyber perils or only the malicious ones, if system failure is covered or not. That gives you then the true picture, and you know finally if there is some potential exposure or not. That's why we believe, we as underwriters, we all have to do an important job actually when we underwrite our traditional lines, right? So we have to understand what is this silent exposure in these lines of businesses, and more importantly, how do they actually affect sort of the loss severity and the loss frequency, right? Is it different than from what we expect to see in the classical property or general liability policy? Or does it have another impact, right? And if yes, so we might want to adjust it as well and update our costing approach, right, to figure in that silent exposure. So there is not a lot of reflections going on at this moment in time in that field, but I guess over time this is becoming a very important reflection for all people doing business in the insurance sector. Now, let's have a look at, based on a cyber data breach case study, how this looks like in practice, right? So really to walk you through what is covered in this case in the different lines of business in different products. And this is a fictitious example I made up for you just to give you a bit kind of a flavor how this could look like. So just briefly explaining the case, right? So let's assume you have a car rental company, right? They rent out cars, obviously, that's their business model. And we do have a travel company who actually works together with the car rental company. So the car rental company, they offer a tool, a piece of software, it's like a booking tool, right? The travel company actually uses to book for their clients cars, when they go to the travel company. So that's a bit the situation. Now let's assume there is a hacker, right? This bad guy over there. And this hacker learns about this booking tool because he was actually observing the IT systems of the car rental company, and the hacker finds a backdoor, right? So a vulnerability. Now, the hacker also knows, obviously, with whom the car rental company is sharing that tool, and so the hacker goes now after the Easy Travel company, right? That's where the data breach happens. Through the backdoor of the tool, they can get access to travel companies' IT security system, to their databases, and the hacker would actually steal confidential data from the customers of Easy Travel. That's driver's license numbers, that's as well credit card information, so highly sensitive information. So that's the case, right? That's our case study we worked on. You also have got the details, then you can read after it in more details. So what happens then after the Easy Travel company finds out that there has been a data breach, right? So they would engage with an IT forensic company to find out where the breach happened and to fix it as well. They would also notify all their customers, send them out a letter or an email that they know that their data has been released publicly. And they would offer their customers free credit monitoring to see if with their stolen data some fraudulent activities have been going on. And last but not least, also because the case was reported in the media, kind of Easy Travel has sort of a bit of reputational loss. They lose clients and then consequently they will also lose business because people don't trust anymore in going to Easy Travel. Now the hacker, we talked about it, and last but not least the customers learn about it and they are going to file a privacy breach class action and sue Easy Travel for having not secured the data confidentially. So now what is covered? That's the important and the interesting question, right? So let's look at Easy Travel as a company, right? So we have seen they have costs to pay the IT forensic company, right? They have costs as well to notify their clients. They have costs to pay somebody to do the credit monitoring on behalf of them for their clients. There is the class action going on, right? So they might be exposed to third-party liability. They do have business interruption because they had actually to clean up their systems, right? And in that course, in that process, they actually went offline for a day. So they also have loss of profits. They could not offer traveling arrangements anymore. And they lost business because people don't want to go to Easy Travel anymore. They don't trust them. Now, in terms of insurance program, let's assume that they buy general liability. Let's assume that they have a property policy, including business interruption. And let's assume as well that they have a directors and officers policy insurance in place, right? All these three policies, they don't have a cyber exclusion, just to make it clear, right? Now, let's start with general liability. So, IT forensics costs not covered. That's a first party element, their own costs, right? The policy would not take it up. The same for notification costs, the same for credit monitoring. Now, interesting is third-party liability. Usually, general liability responds to third-party property and bodily injury, right? Property damage and bodily injury, which we don't have in this case, right? But some of the products, of the general liability products, they do have a section which covers pure financial loss elements. And if you have such a policy in place, you are potentially exposed to pick up sort of the class action, sort of the cyber exposure, if you want so, as well under your GL policy. That's why there's a little green area as well. Now, business interruption, you know that, obviously not covered in GL, and loss of business as well. Let's have a look at the property policies then. Very much the same for the cost section, right? Monitoring, third-party liability, of course not. Business interruption here, there is no physical damage, it's just a data breach, no coverage, and there is anyways no loss of business coverage in property. Interesting now is what happens to D&O, right? So potentially, you know, at the end of the day, you can always go after the D&O policy of a company, right? Because you could argue that the directors and officers, right, they would not actually make sure that Easy Travel would have all the IT security measures to protect the confidential data of their customers, right? And that's why a smart lawyer can actually construct a case and go after them, or the shareholders, I have to say in this case, which filed then a class action against the directors and officers. So potentially all the elements you see there, you know, including also the loss of business, which is sort of, you know, an economic loss to the company as well, can be to some extent covered under a D&O policy. Interesting, right? So just to see a bit kind of how this product we probably never would have thought about, that it responds to cyber, could be potentially exposed. Now, we know there is cyber products out there. So let's assume now they have had a cyber policy. What would have been picked up under this one, right? So obviously all the cost elements, which are a crucial part of cyber policies, are covered, right? And I then also shaded a little bit the D&O element, because as long as there is a cyber policy, which would kick in the first place, right, there might be no loss going to D&Os later on. So as long as cyber covers these elements, people cannot go after the D&O policy. That's why we changed the color there, right? Same for notification cost, credit monitoring. Usually cyber products have a first and a third party element, so it will be covered as well. Business interruption, an important element of cyber. But sort of loss of business is not part of a cyber cover, right? That's usually not covered, so just keep that in mind. So this is the situation of Easy Travel if you look at this product universe. Now let's quickly do a variation of the case study. Let's take out Easy Travel and bring in a new company. Let's assume a law firm, right? They also have access to this booking tool, right? And they book, instead of for their customers, they book for themselves when they travel to their customers, right? Now, same game again. That are the costs, that are the liabilities, now the law firm, and let's assume they have pretty much the same insurance program with one exception. They don't buy D&O, but they buy E&O and PI, right? It's sort of in most jurisdictions mandatory for lawyers, right? So general liability, same picture obviously as for Easy Travel. The same as well for property, right? Nothing changes. Interesting for E&O and PI, the cost element is not covered, right? That's the same as for the other lines here. But when it comes to the third-party liability element, right? Most likely because the lawyers, as part of their professional duties, they have to protect as well the data of their customers, right? They are going to be sued and are picking up this claim under their E&O policy, right? So this is true for many countries, many jurisdictions, as I said, as part of their working contracts and as part of their sort of, you know, professional duties, they also have to take care of the data of their customers, right? And if they fail doing that, so they might be exposed to cyber risk as well. No business interruption, no loss of business, and to complete the picture, you also have the cyber policy. In addition, if you buy that, and you see as a general takeaway, when you buy standalone cyber coverage, you usually get more comprehensive coverage than with the traditional lines. But nevertheless, some of these lines, such as D&O and E&O, they do cover the cyber elements as well, what we call the silent cyber exposure. Just to sum it up quickly, we saw the general liability usually does not respond unless there's some pure financial loss coverage. Property does not respond to data breach. E&O for lawyers or other regulated professions is most likely to respond to the third-party element in a sort of cyber claim. Directors and officers insurance at the end of the day can pick up literally every cyber-related exposure. And so what I said before, standalone coverage is usually covering the very crucial element of the costs of the services, which is different to the traditional lines. So with that, let's have a word on silent cyber and accumulation, right? Because you might say, this is a case study, it has been constructed, right? It's just one single case. It can happen in my portfolio as well, but overall, I'm still happy I'm not so much exposed to cyber. Now, I think how we think about accumulation, there is also different scenarios we look at, and the most important one in terms of silent cyber exposure is critical infrastructure, we believe, right? That's the one where we see most accumulation exposure compared to the other accumulation scenarios, such as data breach and denial of service attacks, right, which are mainly an issue for the affirmative, for the explicit cyber elements. Now, critical infrastructure, let's just quickly have a look at it, right? So there's different elements or different types of critical infrastructures, and there has been already a lot of research to find out which infrastructure is most critical, right? And based on the power outages we have been observing at the beginning of 2000 in California, we actually learned the moment there is no power, the public transportation system is down. The moment there is no power, gas and oil pipelines would not work anymore. The pumps, right, they need electricity as well. No fuel means traffic shuts down, airports are shutting down as well. It also affects water supply because there's also the groundwater being pumped up, right? No electricity means also dehydration and agricultural issues such as crop failure. And last but not least, all the communication network obviously will fail as well. So what we see actually is that sort of the power, the electricity, right, is the most crucial critical infrastructure because of its high interdependence with all the other elements, right? And that's why when we think about silent exposures and accumulation, we look at this scenario explicitly. Just briefly, is there any possibility or is it very likely to attack a power grid, right, nowadays? So you see the different actors there. And just to give you an idea of what a hacker could actually target, right? They could go after the control centers of the transmissions system operators that are the guys who actually control all the electricity flows between different countries, right? They are usually heavily protected, right? They have very high standards in terms of IT security. But if you manage to attack such a transmission operator, the control centers, then the vulnerability will be high, right? Because it most likely leads to a large-scale blackout power outage. Another way is going after the power plants themselves, right? The power producers, they are usually less protected, not as well as the operators of the entire electricity flows. But, you know, once one of the power plants is off the grid, right, that would most likely not influence anything because the grid itself has some stability, some redundancies, and you would actually need to attack quite a lot of power plants, you know, to sort of shake the entire system. And last but not least, some reflections on smart grids. That's all sort of the new sort of elements you have in your home, like a solar panel, like a boiler you can control remotely. And people say that might also be sort of an attack, like we saw with WannaCry now. If you go after all these smart devices, probably it has a collateral effect on the entire power grid as well, right? But sort of the experts, they think at the moment this grid is still too small. Maybe in a couple of years, when it grows over time, it's becoming a critical infrastructure risk as well. So now, is this all theory, or, I mean, we briefly heard it before, right? It already has happened, right? In the Ukraine, like in 2015, where the local power grid has been attacked. I brought you a couple of media sections here. What happened, just briefly, they actually hacked into the industrial control systems of the Ukraine power transmission control centers, they could actually shut down the distribution of the electricity, which led to roughly a 2 days blackout, which affected more than 200,000 people, right, without power. So it's a real threat, right? It already happened, and it can happen again. That's the point here. Now, the important question for all in this room here is, how would such a loss be covered under, let's say, property policies, right? Is there any response to that? And we have to think about 3 things here. So potentially exposed covers are, from an electricity producer side, is their business interruption, obviously, but even more importantly for all the consumers, that's their contingent business interruption, right? So they are dependent on getting the power from their providers. And there's many products out there which do cover actually, as part of extensions, this kind of exposure, right? That they provide actually coverage in case of failure of utility providers. And the third component you could also look at is actually no electricity leading to spoil of food and pharmacy products in warehouses which are not able to cool anymore appropriately. Now, the interesting question is, about the insurance triggers, right? And usually what we, all know, a property policy would generally respond if there is a physical damage. In this case, there hasn't been any physical damage. So with a high likelihood, right, if you have a classic traditional property policy, including business interruption, you could make a case that this is not being covered there, right? Nevertheless, and be careful, right, there is also many other triggers, products out there, which do cover on more like an accidental occurrence basis, right? And we believe that in such a case, like a hack to the power grid, these kinds of products would respond. Last but not least, there is already products in the market from some players who say, we think data as it is tangible property, right? So these kind of products would then respond in such a case, because you could say, data is actually tangible property. I'm not a big fan of that, right? It's very difficult to believe or to see how digital data is tangible, but just making the point here that there is lots of variation in the products out. Last but not least, there is also some legal ambiguity when it comes to that. So there have been recent case law decisions, courts, who see actually that physical damage has a lot of room for interpretation, right? So what they said actually is that if the hack, the attack to the IT system is of such importance that the entire system is rendered dysfunctional, it doesn't work anymore, it's close to being sort of a physical damage, right? And they call that loss of functionality, and they would be in favor to granting cover under this kind of policy still. So as a takeaway, right, it's important for underwriters to clearly look at how the triggers work, right, how they will potentially respond. And second takeaway, there is some remaining exposures as well responding to such a large-scale attack. Now, some last words on, we heard it before, how does impact the ongoing digitalization the traditional lines of businesses, right? There is, obviously a clear trend to more and more. It starts with, the people using the internet. It goes to how many people actually have a smartphone. Also, if you look at, by 2020, we expect that roughly 250 million connected cars are out there on the streets. So there's a lot of connectivity going on, the Internet of Things, smart homes, we discussed it before. And so the big question is obviously how this entire trend affects the traditional lines, right? And I have 2 examples for you. The first one is about connected cars. It's, as a matter of fact, actually very important for cars to be able to speak to each other if you want to reach a stage where cars can actually drive themselves. So the fully autonomous car stage, right? So they have to interact with each other. There's different sensors, but they also have to interact to infrastructure to get their information from, right? So what does it mean, or does it imply actually for us, right, on the insurance side? So a scenario which is likely, right, that somebody actually hacks into connected cars, infiltrates malware into the cars, right, which then obviously allows the attackers to gain full control over the engine, right? So they can shut it down, they can drive it into something, so they have the control on the car, right? Now, in terms of consequences, they can either, create property damage to the car itself, or they can steal it because they can open it remotely by getting into sort of the car or by hacking into the car. So this theft or collision is an issue. They can also create third-party property damage to another car or to some infrastructure, and obviously there is also most likely some bodily injury involved if you think about the situation where the same car model of one producer is being sort of shut down because a hacker could actually achieve or getting control over all the running cars, right? In terms of insurance products which would respond to that or affected lines of business, motor hull, definitely, right, covering the motor-owned damage, motor third-party liability, but also think about the producers of the cars, the manufacturers, right? They also have some responsibility, and we expect that there's anyway going to be a shift from motor liability to product liability in the future, right? So you most likely see also product liability or even recall being affected by such a scenario. The second one I brought with me is a very nice one because it actually fully ties in what we have been reading over the last 3 days with the WannaCry attack, right? So it's all about connected medical devices, right? The scenario there is a hacker group actually manages to infiltrate the IT system of a hospital, right? What they do is two things. They either encrypt sort of the medical devices, so to shut them down, they are not working anymore, or they might want as well to modify medical records and even, exchange prescription data so that the wrong patient gets the drug, right? Which obviously affects the health of the patient. Everything possible. And what we have been seeing with WannaCry is that in the UK especially, some of the hospitals have been heavily affected. So this just illustrates how dependent nowadays we are on connected devices and how poorly protected they are, Because usually when you sort of develop such a device, the most important thing for you is the functionality of the device, right? What it can do. Only in a second run you think about the IT security, right? And that's where I guess this industry still has to cope up and invest a lot more to make these kind of devices which are without doubt very helpful for society, right? But make them safer as well. So consequences, bodily injury, property damage, most likely as well. Business interruption, if you look at the hospitals. And there's a whole range of products which would probably respond to that, starting with general liability, PI medical malpractice, you can think of it. We discussed D&O, property, and the recall and the product liability. Okay? So this brings me back to my holiday picture, actually. And just to sum it up, right, I think we have been seeing together that silent cyber is really a real risk, right? It's not just a theory, it's not just a sort of a bad dream, but it can happen, and we have to understand it, and also we have to try to model it, right? So we have been seeing that unless explicitly excluded, the full exclusion, right, most of the traditional lines, they will respond to some extent to cyber perils, right? We also have been discussing that the underwriting community should have a closer look at it, and think about is there any impact in terms of loss severity and loss frequency for silent cyber in the traditional lines. And I guess it's clear now as well that the standalone products, the affirmative cyber products, they are much more comprehensive in what they can offer in addition to the traditional lines, especially if you look at all the cost aspects, the services, right, which are usually not covered in traditional lines. Then, last word on accumulation. With the example on the power grid attack, it became clear, I guess, that it's not only important to understand accumulation for affirmative cyber, but even more so important to understand it for silent cyber, right? Because all of a sudden, your portfolios, your insurance portfolios, they can actually be exposed to cyber, and it's not how you probably thought them to be, right? So we have to understand that to deal with it. Either maybe exclude cyber or cost for it, that depends then on the case, on your strategy, right? And last but not least, the ongoing trend to more connectivity, to a more digital world is definitely going to increase as well the silent cyber exposure under the traditional lines of businesses. And with that, I hope I could give you a little bit of a flavor what we can find if you dive into the ocean to look at the silent exposure. And with that, I would like to close my speech as well. And I guess then we are moving into the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian. You mentioned Carsten and Fabian, you have mentioned some interesting items, but it seems that there's a lot of gray areas in the conversation in terms of coverage, in terms of processing of claims. The silent discussion about silent cyber seems to be a lot of court cases. With the case of the WannaCry attack, it was done due to unupdated XP Windows systems, and it seems that Microsoft settles a lot of these lawsuits out of court to avoid creating precedent of court cases. So maybe you can give us an idea for the case of WannaCry, how would that litigate, and how would a Munich Re policy or a Swiss Re policy respond to such a case?
Can I answer? I think so. Well, there are coverages, explicit coverage on the market. So in these cases would be covered. It's a non-targeted attack, and if there are costs involved, data reconstruction and so on, then this would be covered. But for each, like hospital and so on, in the UK, if they are covered. When it comes to silent coverage, I think it's an other problem. So you know there are silent coverages, you know there is silent exposure, and if this is covered under like traditional models, during the risk assessment you don't ask for the cyber risk as such, so you don't have an idea about it. That's why we promote the idea to have like an explicit coverage for cyber, then that you can go to a company, you assess the IT risk, and then if there's something happens, that there's a coverage.
Maybe if I can add on that, right? So there has, just back to the WannaCry case, there has been a lot of media coverage. Obviously, everybody could read about it. There was probably it's the largest attack we have been seeing so far. As Carsten mentioned, products would respond to cyber extortion if that is explicitly bought. It would also probably be a business interruption case for some of the products, as we heard, which do cover untargeted attacks. But I'm not so sure yet if it's going to be a huge industry loss, right? I mean, the patching issue is mainly, in my view, an issue for smaller companies who have not yet updated their operating systems, right? I guess all the very large companies, they have also different budgets. They are usually up to date when it comes to being at the latest version of Windows. So let's see, right? Obviously, there has been a lot of IT systems affected, like a lot of computers being affected. But the final loss, the ultimate sort of outcome, still has to be assessed, right? And I guess we're going to see that over the next time.
I'm curious about Fenchurch. Faris, I'm sure, is getting a lot of submissions and requests from banks asking questions about how the BBB is covering this. And maybe you could give us an idea of demand for cyber in the Middle East, what you've been seeing, what clients have been requesting over the last couple of months and year.
Yes. Yes, of course. There are a huge demand on cyber risks, especially in the UAE and in Oman. In fact, there was a big claim in Muscat for one of the banks, and it was settled for several millions, and that triggers the request or the demand for cyber insurances. Unfortunately, the Arab world or the Middle East is split, regarding cyber risks. It is in more, let's say, organized or more regulated markets. You'll find a lot of demand for cyber insurance, and there start being some awareness of the cyber risks insurance. Actually, there are a demand, and they are buying it. Mainly the airlines companies, the big airlines companies in the Middle East, and the banks. Plus, the international companies operating from, in Greece, operating in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait. So we are seeing, a lot of inquiries, and some of them are really very, very serious. And we also seen few claims which are really, big. They are really painful, to the reinsurers to pay them. But the demand is there, I believe. I think it will expand to cover the rest of the Middle East, because actually this lecture, these two presentations, given by Fabian and Carsten, are really very useful. That they shed the light on many, aspects on cyber risk, which will help the insurance companies, agents, brokers, also, to spread it over, and give the awareness, to the insured, to consider seriously insuring against cyber risks.
Thank you, Mohammed. I think there's I hope that wasn't an attack or a hacker that was doing that, but I was just about to mention that we have our technology partner, Escadinia, in the room, and we have the Central Bank of Jordan represented, and other reinsurers and insurance federations and claims specialists. So I think there's a microphone moving around. There's a microphone that will be moving around. So if you have a question, I suggest you raise your hand. There's a question up front. Can we have the microphone, please? Microphone to the front. Right there. Right there.
As it goes. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Just a few corrections, if I may, which is very important. Certainly for you, Fabian. Some cyber policies do cover BI, which has been, they do. And I just want to make it clear, giving the audience, that they do exist in the London market in particular. I will give you the chance to comment on that. In regards to Carsten and certain comments, I just want to also would like to add that you mentioned that 70% of the GWP coming from the United States and 30% coming from the rest of the world. There's a correction, probably you will be found that it's far more than that. For the simple reason is that in the United States, every state has the right to declare any breach. And it's been going on for about 10 to 15 years. Now, my question to you, in Europe, as we will know, it will be declaration coming up as of mid-2018. And I'm pretty confident it will come to this region as well, as we've seen what's happening over the next, it's been happening recently and certainly coming up in the next few months and years to come. And question to you, how you are ready for these new changes in Europe, and also how the market is ready for this new legislation coming forward.
Question. As you know, I'm in the division GAPA, Germany, Asia Pacific and Africa. So, well, I have the luxury that we see like really the market picking up in Germany. Like SMEs, really there's the demand from the SMEs because they want to be prepared when the European regulation is there. You know, if you talk about like highly industrialized countries, in the last years, the companies they really invested a lot in the IT security, in the digitalization of their processes and so on, and they want to keep them protected. And insurance is the solution, and that's why the model of cyber insurance is very successful right now in Germany. Not only the SME business, but the private business as well. And I think because Germany has this IT security law, this very strong one, and driving like the common like forces or to join forces when it comes to search where the attackers maybe for wanna cry and so on. So that this would be like a role model for the other member states, and I'm pretty sure that the situation is very comparable to France, to Austria, to the Nordic countries, and of course to UK. I think it's still picking up, but the market is there, and what we see is that it's like a peer pressure right now, what we see in the German and the French market. So because everybody who thinks of themselves that are really good in product development, they want to have a cyber product, and they want to have an individual cyber product. So, and this is a trend which we are glad that we could accompany this. Does this answer your question somehow?
Yes, it does. There is the other part of what we're going to do for this region, which is incredibly important. I'll give you an example, because probably that will lead you to the answer. Recently, Turkey has introduced the Data Protection Act, whereby any name is being hacked or taken away from a server, ex-server, it doesn't really matter from which institution, they would pay a fine, I think between $50 to $100 per name. Now, knowing what's been happening in Turkey, and what will continue to happen in the Middle East as well, is that the government will put more pressure on all institutions to make sure that data is protected. Now, we talked about Europe, we talked about legislation is taking place. What's happening with there is no legislation in place, but this region needs support from the guys like you, from the market, in order to have a policy that really fits for purpose.
Well, we have ready-made products, and as you know, usually it starts from the industrial side. Let's say that like highly regulated industries like financial institutions, insurance companies, and so on, they start. What we have in Munich is we have like a legal word map to assess the development risk in the various countries. This we have for the Middle East, Eastern countries as well. So we use it. We are on the market right now. I visited a number of the Middle Eastern countries already, and it takes a while. But it usually starts from the industrial side. So I'm pretty sure I will see some of these specialists in the near future, and then in a year to go, you other lines of business.
Fabian, I want to redirect the same question to you, because we work very closely with Swiss Re at Newton Insurance as our lead reinsurers, and so a similar case that you presented about the power generation companies. If you applied the Stuxnet virus, which happened in Iran on the centrifuges, Siemens centrifuges, where they spun them out of control, and apply the same concept to a power generation facility in Jordan by an American company that's publicly listed, like AES, for example, where they spin the turbines out of control, maybe cause a big claim, and then convert that into a BI claim, tie it up to NEPCO, and then you have a very big, serious issue. So Swiss Re, I think you're on the risk, so maybe you can give us an idea of how you deal with that, where the approximate cause is actually a malicious attack by a hacker in some
So thanks for the question. I cannot really comment about if you are on the risk or not. I mean, that's not a kind of part of what I'm doing. But just as a general sort of feedback, I mean, the cyber policies where they started in the past, they would actually respond to malicious attacks, right? That's where all started. So to really give coverage against, hacking attacks to a company, right? Then over time, they extended actually, right? They would go into system failure. They would also cover internal attacks, so from employees being fraudulent or, misusing IT system. So the entire coverage evolved over time, right? And so in this specific case, you mentioned it heavily depends, obviously, on how this product is set up, right? If it's a fully comprehensive cover, what are sort of the elements? So that's why the point I tried to make before, it all goes back to the individual product, right? As a matter of fact, there is no standardized product out there. There is some first attempts in the German market, at least for the SME segment, where the local insurance association would come up with sort of a template wording, right, for this kind of risk. But besides that, right, there is a huge variety of cyber policies floating around with different elements, be it on the first party, on the third party side, with also different definitions, right? It's also very important to look at how people define an IT system, right? Is it only the computers and the servers on the own premises, or would it as well include all the IT equipment they rent out from somebody, or they source it out to a third party provider, right? And so, as so often in life, the devil lies in the details, and to look at this specific case, right, one would need to look at the policy wording as well to understand what is the ultimate coverage for this example here.
Yes, regarding banks, I have been talking to banks in Lebanon, and they were all from the Arab world. They are completely irresponsible, and they don't know what is cyber. They believe they are very well protected and that their banking policy will pay for it. So I wonder, the banks who are going to apply now probably are banks who know that they are going to be attacked. But this is not the question. The question is regarding your remark, Fabian. It would be easier to insure LPO since to insure D&O policies, since it covers all the cyber risks. So this is my first question. The second question is, what are the insurance companies doing to put some standards regarding the possibility of insuring cyber risk? Thank you.
Let me respond to that. So I was in no way suggesting, right, that people should write more D&O over cyber exposures, right? The point I wanted to make here is that if there is a case, right, where the D&Os, they would actually sort of be in breach with their duty of care, right? So the example I mentioned is that they should have thought about their IT security. They didn't encrypt the data on their servers, or they didn't sort of hire experts to do that, right? So they have to do that as well. And with the GDPR, that's going to be a central element as well, right? So if you can construct a case and you can actually demonstrate that they were in breach with their duty of care, right, then most likely you can find coverage under a D&O policy as well. Nevertheless, you still have to prove that, right? It's not like that it's an automatic coverage, right? So I'm speaking now in the name of my company, I'm definitely in favor of writing cyber on a standalone basis as an isolated product, right? For many reasons. First of all, I'm sure you get much more transparency on the underlying exposure. You can also ask for a price for it, right? You get a dedicated premium, If you include cyber elements in your traditional lines, most likely it goes out for free, right? If you're lucky, you get a little bit of premium, but I doubt that you get enough premium to really cover such a loss, right? Because that was never in the intent of the original product at the beginning when you designed it.
So again, right, I guess I just wanted to create awareness that there might be some cyber claims, being picked up under D&O policies. There has been examples in the industry already, but definitely I'm in favor of going standalone, having clear coverage elements, asking for a premium, doing the risk engineering as we saw it before, right? Then you can properly underwrite that kind of product. And I fear that I have forgotten the second piece of your question. Banks and their expectation with BBB? Yeah. So I guess same for any type of large corporate risks, right? So you want definitely to see that they have thought about their IT security, right? So once you underwrite such a risk, you definitely look for information at what do they have in place? Do they have a CISO? Do they have like an understanding of their core information assets, right? How are they protected, right? Do they have an emergency plan in place, right, in case of a data breach? Are they doing trainings with their employees, right? And especially in the case of banks, right, obviously they aggregate a lot of sensitive data from their clients, financial data, right? So definitely this is an important aspect to look at. You can always ask, is a large bank more exposed than a smaller bank? In terms of probably what you can get there, it's more attractive as a target, but I would also argue that the larger banks, they on average have probably invested more in IT security, and the smaller ones are lacking a little bit behind. So it's difficult to judge if one or the other risk is a better one, right?
If there are any other questions, question over here.
Yeah. I have a question. Going back to the principles of insurance, that after any indemnity you have to subrogate against any party. So now we saw that cyber insurance should be bought by any client, and in case of a claim, and we heard that it goes to court and then there are fines. So what will be the case after paying this claim under the cyber insurance? Shall we go back on the IT software providers, or shall we go back on the hacker? Until when? So we'll end up with a loss on the bottom line of this insurance cover, and how we're going to do the money after paying these losses. So if you can please explain to us. Thank you.
It depends. Frankly speaking, so sometimes it's really costly to dig into all the systems, especially if when you have like a long retroactive cover or something like this. So and to find out where the basis of the attack were, so there usually you find in the wordings like economic guidance and then you need to talk to the IT service provider to manage them, really to say, okay, until this sum, please go into the system. If this is exceeded, stop it. So we have some experience with the IT service providers in Germany already and in our Asian market, and this is what you really have to negotiate with them individually. It depends on the coverages, depends on the limits, and so forth. But usually the process as such is, if you have like in first-party damage, you get a report, service provider, that gives you at least the basis for, because usually you have the first party claim first and then later on the liability claim. So and the IT service provider we use should be able to have like a good monitoring system. They can write reports which are safe before the court and so forth, and that's what we are taking care of.
redirect that question again. So would an SAP have a product liability policy, or Microsoft have a product liability policy that would respond to a subrogated recovery based on, let's say, a WannaCry hack? So Microsoft might, I don't know if they have a product liability policy, or SAP maybe in Germany, but would a product liability policy respond to a subrogation by an insurance company on such a hack? And maybe you could give us an example of an IT company that you insure or that you've subrogated against from your claims history.
You see cases in the market where this works, but in this case, like Microsoft, this wouldn't be like an accumulation case, it would be like a severe loss. You have the sum one time, and then it's paid out. Of course, there could be some liabilities from the, I call them Microsoft clients, which have to be paid, but that's why I said, so to provide cyber cover really requires especially for those large-scale industry companies, to go into the system and to have like a really sophisticated risk assessment in place. Those things can happen under product liability, as Fabian said, but this is not the accumulation exposure we are worrying about it. It's for us, it's the first party losses of in each of the affected companies which might have a cyber insurance.
And if I may add on that, I would expect, right, that somewhere in the terms and conditions when you install Microsoft's Windows system, right, and you have to click I agree to the terms and conditions, right, somewhere in that, probably have to scroll for 5 minutes usually. I doubt that anybody in this room usually reads it, right? There is some waivers in there, I'm sure, right? So that you cannot claim and go back to Microsoft, because what I expect to find there is something like where it requires you to regularly update your operating system, as well to upload the patches the moment they are available. And if you fail doing that, usually you don't get coverage. Or, I mean, in this case, you could not actually go after Microsoft, There's also interesting side remark in some of the products, especially in the SME segment, right? People would actually put warranties into their cyber policies where they say, in order to get coverage, you have to make proof actually that you have up-to-date firewalls in place, that you have up-to-date virus scanners in place, that you can show actually that you were sort of taking care of your IT security. And if this is not the case, you have then a hard stance to claim for coverage under the policy form, right?
I just want to add one thing to this. So, what we think, if an SME gets this obligation, like a technical state to comply with this technical state of the art, if the insurer uses this and can't make sure that the insured as such, like the bakery, the slaughtery around the corner, can comply to these rules, it's a non-obligation. So this is not safe before court. And another thing, so limitations of liability we see also with the other IT service providers, and this is actually a fact. So why should insurance provide more coverage than the actual clients? That's why we think, okay, we can give these coverage, but there should be some transparency to which IT service providers the insured as such would deliver processes or not.
I don't think we're going to take much longer. Maybe we'll have one question, and then I think the organizers have prepared a gift for the speakers. So maybe we'll take one more question, and then we'll break for lunch prior to But first we'll have a thank you note. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to hijack the Q&A, but it seems that I have now with another question. It's very, very briefly. When you looked at the slide, when you put your pricing model, you might recall, you take the information from a proposal form, presumably, you take all the information. However, I come across a situation whereby you will need to quote on an IP, value of an IP moving forward. In case of there is a hack, they say, if my IP has been stolen, is worth X. How would you quote, if indeed you do quote for that? That's question number one. And question number two, within the same question, how also would you quote for share delusion, or minimization of share value in case of there is a hack?
We have delivered like a risk assessment matrix where we can see, okay, if there are some IP affected, so this would have like an effect on the risk quality, and this risk quality is actually then considered in the pricing. So it's like a surcharge or a rebate then on the pricing. So this is how we try to consider this. And the second question, it's gone. What was it again? Yeah. Well, this is what we consider in our industrial pricing. What you saw is our SME pricing, so like portfolio pricing. When we have this shared value problem, well, we can approach it via the amount of data, and so we have like a PML for each covered section. But this is for the large-scale programs, limits up to 200 to 300 million US dollars. No, not minimum, but like these industrial programs we see in our books.
Okay, thank you, Carsten, and thank you, Fabio, and I hope that everyone updates their Windows and iTunes and makes sure that you're all up to date before leaving the room, so that we don't create any cyber attacks at the conference. In the meantime, I think our presenters wants to give us a few words.
As all the sessions have been covered for this day, we would like to thank our speakers and head of sessions for the fruitful and rich experience they've shared with us. Now we kindly ask Mr. Mohammed al-Sayyid to deliver the honoring gift to our first speaker, Mr. Carsten Topsch. We kindly ask Mr. Faris Gammoh to deliver the honoring gift to our second speaker, Mr. Fabian Willi. Please help me welcome to the stage Mr. Abdul Khaliq Raouf Khalil, Secretary General of GAIF. To honor both head of sessions, Mr. Faris Gammoh and Mr. Mohammed al-Sayyid. Last but not least, we would love to invite you to lunch hosted by Nascori France, our platinum sponsor, and we'll leave you with Mr. Ghassan Jabbour and Mrs. Christina Shalita and the team. Thank you.
هلو جميعا. بعتقد سمعتوا سبيكس كثير من الصبح ومن البارحة. حنعمل نحن هلا سبيك بس حبينا نرحب فيكم ونقول لكم اهلا وسهلا. نتشكر الفيدريشن على الاورجنايزيشن. سمول برزنتيشن حتكون بريزنتد هلا على السكرين لناسكو. انا وكريستينا والتيم نقول لكم اهلا وسهلا.
Hope you will enjoy the lunch and thank you for coming.